Thank you, Josh. Thank you for the invitation to share this presentation. As I've said to you, I love sharing my programs with the Theosophical Society and the wide view of cultures and spirit that its members take. And thank you to everyone present for joining us today and those in the future that hopefully will be viewing through YouTube as we take this journey looking at the symbol of the veil. It's a fascinating topic. It's really rich with meaning. And we're going to be using a spiritual lens to look at the veil. The Center for Sacred Art, the organization that I'm a part of in Seattle, is a multi-faith arts organization dedicated to illuminating how contemporary spirituality can draw from and work with the sacred artworks, traditions, cultures of the world. So the slide presentation that I've prepared for you today incorporates and explores a variety of religions and cultural angles. The wide lens we're using is a wonderful way to reflect on human experience and commonalities. There are remarkable parallels in the spiritual meaning of the veil in many cultures. So the veil is a very popular metaphor. You find it in many commonly used phrases. How many times have you heard the veil of existence, the veil of forgetting, the veil of sleep, the veil of dreams, the veil of illusion, and the veil between worlds? And let's not forget to lift the veil, to part the veil, to pierce the veil, and beyond the veil. So if the veil is a metaphor, what does it stand for? As with most symbols, it's useful to first carefully examine the physical nature of the object. So fundamentally, a veil is made of woven cloth, which means it's intrinsically flexible and can be used in many ways. If the fabric is loosely woven, the veil drapes easily and takes on the form it surrounds or covers. And in that circumstance, it reveals. If the fabric is more tightly woven and hung like a curtain, it can obscure and conceal. This ability to both reveal and conceal is what makes the veil such a rich, powerful, and fascinating symbol. As our commonly used phrases suggest, the veil's poetic meaning has a lot to do with conscious awareness. In the spiritual context, it plays a role in our proximity to the realm of the sacred, that which is beyond our mundane world, for veils can be used to separate and divide space. I'm going to add a clue. The veil in religious symbolism is much like a scrim in theater, that stretched, gauzy fabric that can appear opaque or translucent depending on how it's lit. The location of the light controls what you see, making possible magical effects as actors reveal, disappear, ghostly apparitions, projected scenery. Kind of sounds like life in a way. So let's dig in. We're going to start with how the veil has been used in various ritual settings. Following that, we'll look at veiled deities and prophets. That will take us into how humans veil themselves for religious and spiritual purposes. From there, we'll look at the darker associations of the veil involving illusion, delusion, and death. And finally, we'll consider reincarnation and the intriguing role the veil is understood to play in the story of the soul's journey. About halfway through, there'll be a stretch break. We're going to start with the ancient Middle East because there are precedents there for the use of cultic curtains that have endured in different cultures for nearly 5,000 years. This is a ceramic portable shrine dating from the 8th to 9th century BC. It was decorated to represent the facade of a building and has an opening in the shape of a door. Archaeologists understand it as a miniature depiction of a temple, or more specifically, the inner shrine of a temple. Inside shrines like this one, there would be kept divine symbols and little figurines of gods and goddesses. True to the design of real temples of the time, the shrine's opening is flanked by two columns. Between the columns would typically hang the sacred curtain that was hung before the Holy of Holies. The term for the curtain, I believe it's parakhet, derives from 3rd millennium BC Mesopotamia and is similar to an Akkadian word meaning curtain or obstacle. The understanding was that behind the curtain was the seat of the god, their sanctuary, their divine throne room. It was a place in temples of the period where only the high priest was allowed to go behind the curtain. There are no surviving examples of sacred curtains from Mesopotamia or the Eastern Mediterranean because ancient woven fabrics in those places were made of perishable materials like linen and wool, which are subject to decay. But in Egypt, thanks to its dry climate, textiles from ancient portable shrines and burials have survived. Additionally, we have plenty of ancient Egyptian depictions of sacred veils, such as the ones hanging before shrines located on barks, barks, which are ritual boats. They could be anywhere from miniature to full size that transported cult statues to temples. I can't help but be struck by the imagery of the Rider-Waite Tarot deck's High Priestess card, seen on the left of this slide, and how the image's setting is so true to actual ancient temples and tabernacle entrances. Here again, we have two massive columns between which hangs a curtain, a veil. The Rider-Waite deck is the basis for many modern tarot decks, and we can see its influence on the right in the High Priestess card from the ancient Egyptian tarot deck published in 1994. There's a lot going on in the Egyptian tarot image, but I want to keep us focused on the veil, the columns from which it hangs, and the priestess. Whereas the veil on the Rider-Waite is embellished with pomegranates, which are associated with the ancient Mediterranean. In the ancient Mediterranean world, they were associated with mysteries of death, conception, rebirth, fertility. The veil on the ancient Egyptian tarot card features the Egyptian symbol for spiritual rebirth after death, lotuses. It was believed that a lotus blossom, because of its intense fragrance, would help restore the senses of the deceased once they reached the afterlife. Before the columns and veil is the high priestess, who acts as the gatekeeper, negotiating passage between the material and spiritual worlds, the human mind and divine consciousness. She's stationed along the route of mystery and meditation, guarding the entrance to the realm of the soul. Representing hidden knowledge and an intuition, she encourages you to trust in your own intuitive ability to navigate spiritual journeys and the unknown. Sometimes interpreters of the tarot see the High Priestess card as showing Isis, the most popular of all ancient Egyptian deities. The Abrahamic traditions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam that followed on the heels of ancient Middle Eastern and Mediterranean cultures continued to use the practice of veils, indicating highly significant spiritual and ritual places, the Holy of Holies. As Moses was leading the Hebrews out of Egypt and into the Promised Land, he was guided by God to erect a tabernacle in the desert. It was a kind of tent sanctuary, seen here in this slide in the cutaway view. And it was built to the specifications viewed as being given to Moses by God at Sinai. It was designated as the dwelling place of the presence of the divine. The entrance to the sacred precinct and to the tabernacle itself consisted of curtains. You see them here, the striped blue, purple, and red curtains. And within the tabernacle, the space was divided by a third curtain. And beyond that last veil was the supreme holy of holies, the ark, which contained Moses's 2 tablets inscribed with the 10 commandments. Only a high priest could enter through the veil into the Holy of Holies, and only on a specified day of atonement. A more permanent and formal place of prayer and reconciliation for the people of Israel was created with the building in Jerusalem of the first great temple, also known as Solomon's Temple, which you see illustrated here. Note the massive columns that flank its entrance. Inside, its design followed that of the Israelites' previous and portable place of worship, Moses' tabernacle. The sanctuary was divided by a veil, and beyond that was the Holy of Holies and the Ark. To this day, the spatial formulation of the original tabernacle persists in the design of Jewish sacred space. Each synagogue has a Torah ark, the place where scrolls containing the 5 books of Moses are kept. In most cases, the ark is located on the wall of the synagogue closest to Jerusalem, and covering the ark niche is a veil, symbolizing the ancient curtain that articulated the most holy sacred space in Moses' tabernacle. On the left, you see a contemporary example of a veil covering a Torah ark in a German synagogue. Notice how in the center of the dark blue veil is embroidered in gold images of Moses' tablets that received the 10 commandments. And on the right is a beautiful painting of a rabbi holding a Torah scroll used for communal worship and prayer in synagogues. And behind him is a large yellow veil used to screen the Torah ark. This drive to use veils to demarcate and screen sacred space is really strong. So we're going to look at some examples in Christianity before we move on to Islam and then other types of veiling. In Hagia Sophia, Constantinople's great Christian Byzantine-era cathedral, which was built in the 6th century, the sanctuary was separated from the nave by a freestanding screen called a chancel screen, also known as a templon. It was made of vertical columns with a horizontal beam atop them, looking much like this 800 plus year old templon, which comes from a church in Georgia in the Caucasus. Significantly, curtains were hung behind the chancel screen and could be closed by priests at will. Okay, so screens like this were separating the altar area from the other part of the church where people that weren't priests that were just there to attend would be seated. Once the largest church in the world, Hagia Sophia was considered a quintessential model and high point of Christian culture. It was enormously influential on Christian sacred architecture, both in the East and West. A continuation of this idea of the chancel screen can be found in medieval churches of Western Europe, made of carved stone or wood, and typically highly decorated. They were visual showpieces that separated the sacred space of the chancel, where priests offered the Mass, from the nave, the secular space of the church frequented by parishioners. Okay. The chancel screen, or the templon, from about 1400 on, was the predecessor of today's iconostasis screen in Eastern Christian churches. The iconostasis is located in the same place within Eastern Christian churches, and it visually continues the basic structure of columns with the horizontal beam above. What's fascinating is that the iconostasis makes visible what earlier altar curtains screened. Each aperture forms a kind of window to the sacred space behind it, and in each one of those windows, paintings, icons illustrate the heavenly world imagined beyond. With the most important images, Christ and the Virgin Mary nearest the center, then the saints, and finally angels at the outer edges. Early iconostases consisted of one tier, like you see here. Uh, its very center has a curtained doorway. That red is a embroidered velvet curtain that priests use to enter the altar area. And this is consistent with all iconostasis, that there's always this passageway in the center for the priests, and these swinging doors and the curtain allow them to go back and forth. Over time, and in larger churches, the number of tiers grew. This iconostasis from a Greek Catholic cathedral in Jerusalem has 3 tiers. In grand cathedrals in Russia, you can find towering iconostasis built of 7 tiers. The spatial configuration in these Eastern Christian churches still maintain the basic design of Moses' tabernacle in the desert, with the altar area screened more definitively than ever with wood rather than a veil, but the painted icons placed on the iconostasis serve as piercings of the veil, windows into heaven that imaginatively bridge the earthly and divine worlds. Turning to Islam and its most holy of holies in Mecca, we see the persistence of ancient religious practices involving the veil. Devout Muslims hope to make a pilgrimage to Mecca in Saudi Arabia at least once during their lifetime. And one of the first deeds prescribed for them once they get to Mecca is to walk 7 times around the Kaaba, the structure that you see here. It's located in the center of Islam's most important mosque, the direction towards which the whole of the Muslim world turns when performing uh, their prayers 5 times a day. Within Islam, the Kaaba came to be considered the axis mundi, the world center, with the gate of heaven directly above it, the place where the sacred intersects with the profane. It's believed to symbolically represent the house of God, and like Moses' Holy of Holy, the structure has a cubical shape. The exterior of the Kaaba is shrouded in a veil, the kiswa, which is considered one of the most sacred objects in Islamic art, ritual, and worship. Its silk is embroidered with beloved inscriptions from the Quran, and it's raised above the ground so that pilgrims cannot soil it by touching it. Every year, the veil of the kiswa is replaced, and a new veil is placed over the old, and then the old is released from underneath. So the holy is always shrouded and screened from sight. The old veil is taken away, it's cut into pieces, and distributed as treasured relics. Nowadays, the Kaaba is basically empty inside, just a few lamps, incense burners, and inscriptions from the Quran. Its vacancy is a fitting for the mystery of the divine, which is beyond our senses and the physical world. One might say the emptiness represents extinction of attachments in one's ego, enabling one to progress closer to God. From the veiled sacred spaces of sanctuaries and tabernacles, let's turn now to deities and prophets. Does the veiling of these figures serve a similar purpose? This evocative painting is by the Russian painter Nicholas Roerich, a remarkable mystic who was interested in theosophy and esoteric knowledge. Roerich created this painting entitled Mother of the World in 1937. It was a composition he repeated over and over again, and each time he created the Great Mother with the veil falling over her face. The garment that she's cloaked in is embroidered with flora and fauna, highlighting her concern for the natural world, her connection to it. And then there's a river of life that flows in front of her. And if you look down below in the very front, you'll see two females kneeling in adoration before the Great Mother. One is representing the East in Himalayan Buddhist dress on the left, and the other represents the West, dressed like a medieval Christian nun. Roerich's artistic goal was to create a synthesized archetypal imagery that speaks to all people. And he does so in this painting in part by veiling the Great Mother's face, thereby reducing her individuality. Roerich's wife, Helena, commented on the painting, saying that by screening her view of the world, the Great Mother is better able to put her attention on the transcendent. I rather like that. So the veil serves multiple purposes. It's a radiant, deeply mystical vision. Light emanates from the Mother of the World, and tiny figures, emissaries of her awakened consciousness, twinkle and float in the sky like stars. The painting is a great testament to the Roerich's faith in the divine feminine and her power to restore the wholeness to the world. Isis is another deity that has ancient connections to the veil. Originally an ancient Egyptian goddess, one of the most important, her worship spread throughout the Greco-Roman world. Isis was the daughter of the goddess of the sky and the god of the earth. She's the ancient Egyptian goddess of magic, motherhood, healing, fertility, and she's the goddess of life. Notice she's holding in her left hand the Ankh, the Egyptian symbol of life. Because Isis was married to Osiris, god of life, death, resurrection, and the afterlife, Isis also has funerary connections. She embodies the great cycle of life, therefore, the past, the present, the future, represented by the three flames of the burning lamp of life that she holds in her right hand. Similar to Rorik's Great Mother, this sculpture, which was created in the 20th century, shows Isis's face and pharaonic headdress draped in a veil. The idea of the veil of Isis is a powerful metaphor originating from an ancient Egyptian statue at Psyche on the Nile's delta that represented the inaccessibility of nature's secrets. The inscription on that ancient sculpture was repeated at the base of this sculpture that we're looking at, and the inscription reads, "I am all that was, is, and shall be. No mortal has ever raised my veil." The notion that Isis held the mysteries of nature and life took an interesting turn during the Enlightenment of the 18th century. During the Age of Reason, European scientists and thinkers passionately believed that the best way to advance civilization and knowledge was through the superior tools of logic and scientific thought, rather than relying on religious beliefs, intuition, superstition. This late 19th century sculpture speaks to that shift in values, the desire to uncover and gain control of nature's mysteries. Its title is Nature, Unveiling Herself to Science. We can understand the figure as Isis because if you look closely, there's a green scarab that's meaningfully attached to the front and center of her garment between her breasts. Now let's look at veiling in the case of prophets and messengers who transmit divinely inspired revelations. By the way, the English word revelation comes from the Latin revelare, which means to unveil or uncover. When Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the Ten Commandments, the book of Exodus tells us his face was extraordinarily radiant because of his direct contact with God. So radiant, in fact, that when Aaron and the Israelites saw Moses' face, they were afraid to come near him. In an effort to calm the Israelites, Moses veiled his face and kept the veil on until he went back to speak with God, at which time he removed it. So this is the case of a prophet, not a deity, who comes into contact with the divine and experiences intense illumination. The veil is needed afterwards to protect the uninitiated from the overwhelming glory of divine light. Saint Gregory the Great, who lived from 540 to 604, was a very important writer who contributed much to the formation of medieval Christianity. He was the abbot of a monastery, a bishop, and then a pope. and is remembered for developing the Roman liturgy into Gregorian chant. In this medieval book illumination, we see Gregory on the right, where he's been dictating behind a veil. On the other side of the veil is Gregory's secretary, Peter. He's holding a tablet upon which he's been recording Gregory's words. Long periods of silence during Gregory's dictation have made the secretary curious about what's going on behind the veil. So the secretary pierces the veil with his pointed stylus in order to peep through. What he sees is the Holy Spirit in the form of a white dove perched on Gregory's shoulder, whispering into Gregory's ear. This is the source of inspiration that has enabled Gregory to write so many wonderful sermons and books. So, this medieval image graphically lays out and reiterates that idea that when priests are behind the curtain, they have special access to the divine. In that holy space, one can receive inspiration directly from God. The Lenten practice of veiling holy images is another way we can consider veiling in the context of spirituality. This is a Catholic liturgical practice that's been going on during the season of Lent since at least the Middle Ages. Now, Lent is the period before Easter, when Christians reflect on the events of Christ's life before he was crucified and died. It's a time of prayer, repentance, atonement, and self-denial. And during this period of penance, Lenten veils dramatize the Christian notion of separation between humanity and the divine that can happen because of sin. As you can see, the draping is done with purple veils. Purple, which is the church's color of penance and mourning, is the traditional color of Lent. So the veiling of crucifixes and holy images is a way to heighten the sense of meaning, anticipation, the mystery, as the faithful move closer in time to Easter Sunday, which is the pinnacle of the liturgical calendar. On Good Friday, the day Christ died, and 2 days before his resurrection on Easter, all these purple veils are taken away. And that act signifies the removal of the separation between God and humankind. It references the New Testament story that when Christ died, the curtain of the temple in Jerusalem was supernaturally torn from top to bottom. With the removal of the veils, the door of heaven is opened, and believers are reassured that they're able to approach the divine directly through their faith in Jesus Christ. So we're roughly about halfway through the talk. It's a lot. We're covering so many different cultures, so many different angles. I think we should take a break. Let's call it a 7-minute break. And please stretch, have some water, and see you back soon.
Thank you, Victoria. Yeah, let's take a 7-minute break. If you're here in Seattle, it's a little sunny outside, surprisingly. We'll see you in 7 minutes. That's 4:44.
Okay.
All right, it's 4:44. Welcome back from break. Thank you, Victoria.
Oh, okay. So my slide is not advancing. I'm not sure why. I think my technical support person is coming.
Wonderful. We're very appreciative. Okay.
I think it's going to go now. Yeah. Sorry about that. So, welcome back, everybody. Um, let's continue with a look at how the veiling of people's bodies can enhance spiritual and religious practice. These are Mongolian shaman costumes. Shamans, like priests, play an important role in accessing the sacred, traditionally through ritual, alternative states of awareness, and trance practices. They are able to journey beyond our physical world and astrally travel to other worlds where they connect with spirits in order to achieve healing for their tribal communities and individuals. The fringe or eye curtain that hangs down over the shaman's face is a distinctive and important part of Siberian shamans' costumes. They say the fringe is there to protect people looking upon the shaman. For when a spirit takes the shaman over, people must not look at the shaman's eyes or face, or it will scare them or harm them because of the great power of the spirit that is inhabiting them during ritual. It's very similar to the Moses story, isn't it? On the right, you can see how some headdresses of Mongolian shamans can also have eyes pictured on them. This represents spiritual eyes for the shaman to use while in the spirit world. Those eyes are also useful for scaring away unwelcome and hostile spirits. Covering the head with a prayer shawl is a practice found in many cultures. In the Jewish tradition, the use of prayer shawls, talit, is a very old practice. They are worn over the shoulders, but some of the devout wear them over their head during prayer and during the study of scripture. It brings one into an attitude of reverence and humility and creates a kind of private prayer closet that screens away outer distractions so that one can focus on connecting with the divine. This photo shows Jewish worshipers praying in front of Jerusalem's Western Wall during Passover. It's Judaism's holiest prayer site. In mystical Judaism, the Talit prayer shawl is understood to reiterate the covering of Moses' tabernacle in the desert. In Jewish mystical thought, the tabernacle is one's own body where the experience and vision of God may be realized deep within. Many devout Jews are buried with their personal prayer shawl wrapped about them as a shroud. We've looked at how veils are used to mark the transition from the ordinary world to sacred space. So the use of these special and very personal veils for funerary purposes can be understood as easing that transition from this world to the world of spirit. Another example of veiling as a part of spiritual practice can be found in India. This photograph was taken at an ashram in the sacred city of Vrindavan. These women are in private prayer with Krishna, who is said to have been born nearby. When Hindus cover their heads while praying or chanting mantras, it's all about entering respectfully into a holy space with awareness, reverence for the divine presence, and humility. As with the Jewish use of prayer shawls, Hindu veiling for prayer also helps devotees cultivate concentration. Additionally, covering the head is believed by Hindus to help contain the spiritual energy generated during prayer because they believe energy can be lost from the top of the head. Veiling's been a part of religious initiations and rites from ancient times. It supports spiritual experience by helping initiates go inward during ritual. And it protects the spiritual energy and purity that they've cultivated and accumulated while preparing for the ritual. During ritual, a veil can keep their focus on it helps to keep their focus on their experience while they inhabit a sacred space under the veil. Now, there's a phrase, taking the veil, and that refers to the beautiful Roman Catholic ritual of nuns consecrating themselves to monasticism. The ritual is a celebration of both death and rebirth. It signifies the nun's death to the secular world and her rebirth and a new spiritual life with Christ. The transformative ritual, which we see here in the slide, resembles a mystical marriage to Christ in which she is wed through love to the divine. So the initiate is the woman with the white veil in this case. Vestal virgins, ancient Roman priestesses of Vesta, goddess of the hearth, wore white veils while they performed rituals for the well-being of Rome. The veil that was part of their priestess attire symbolized the women's unique life of service as well as their purity and a devotion to Vesta. They maintained her sacred fire because she was the goddess of the hearth and home and guardian of Rome's sacred hearth flame. These Vestal virgins were untouchable. They held an extremely prestigious position in Rome. They participated in all the major dedications and ceremonies and were thought to possess certain magical powers, very much held in awe. Their veils, which were worn during ceremonies, contributed to a sense of mystery and awe. I'm not focusing on art per se in this presentation, but I do want to acknowledge this wonderful marble sculpture of a Vestal Virgin made in 1847 by Raffaele Monti, M-O-N-T-I. The piece with its illusionistic veil earned him recognition as a leading sculptor of the time. Sculptures of veiled figures had peaked in popularity during the 1700s in Italy. They were an opportunity for sculptors to show their technical mastery over marble. Monti and other artists revived this technically demanding tradition about a century later. And we're going to be seeing more examples of veiled figures when we look at funerary art. Following this subject of priestesses and veils, I had to include this 19th century painting showing a high priestess serving as the oracle of Delphi at the Temple of Apollo in ancient Greece. Notice the large crack in the ground for the priestess's feet. Many believe that the oracle of Delphi would sit above the crack as shown here, and use her veil to capture the raising vapors. Vapors believed to connect her to divine consciousness. Uh, as the priestess breathed in the gases, she would go into a trance like state, transmitting prophecies inspired by the god Apollo. The Oracle of Delphi was one of the most prestigious and authoritative religious roles in the ancient world from the end of the 7th century BC to late in the 4th century AD. That's a long time. There's another role that's been assigned to the idea of veil that's very significant and pertinent to our investigation today. It's the role of veil as representing Maya, or the delusive nature of appearances. Maya is a concept found in a number of Eastern religions. Basically, it's about how the phenomenal world that we experience is not what we think it is. Part of the notion is that there is an additional reality, a spiritual reality, that lies beyond our ability to perceive it. And between those two worlds lies the veil. This colorful little image, inspired by the folk art of India, handles this very serious topic in a gentle and charming way. Maya, personified here as a woman, lays out her patchwork veil for three men to view. They might represent Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, or Sikhism, as those religions incorporate the belief in Maya in one way or another. This is a photo of an Indian dance troupe performing a dance drama about the Hindu god Krishna, who is seen here with his arm raised. After reenacting many scenes from his life, the dancers reach the climax of their sacred drama. Krishna casting away the veils of illusion, Maya, revealing the true nature of the universe, explaining the nature of human reality and how the incarnated and phenomenal physical world is only a mask of reality and not reality itself. The true and ultimate reality is God, the divine. The veil of Maya, then, is that which separates us from this understanding and having a clear view into the nature of reality. Here's an image from the sacred art of India that you may recognize. It's a sculpture of the Hindu god Shiva, shown as Nataraja, the Lord of the Dance. It offers a beautiful vision of consciousness in its unfolding, and it includes a very clear teaching about the place of illusion. Here's how Joseph Campbell described this complex and meaningful image. The upper right hand of the dancing god holds a little drum shaped like an hourglass, and the rhythm of which is the world-creating beat of time, which draws a veil over the face of eternity, projecting temporality and therefore the temporal world. In other words, the world of birth and death. The god's left hand holds the flame of spiritual light that burns the veil away, thus annihilating the world and revealing the void of eternity. The second right hand, which is a little bit lower, is in the fear dispelling mudra. Shiva is stamping upon a dwarf, which represents Maya. Let's see. Just lost my place for a moment here. illusion, delusion, ignorance, forgetfulness, and the true nature of reality. So the dance is all about the existence of the relative world, the cycle of birth and death that we're all familiar with, and the liberation from that illusion that which involves thinking that the physical is all that there is. Buddhism developed out of Hinduism. It too recognizes the role that the veil of Maya plays in human experience. Buddhists believe that the physical universe that we occupy is ultimately a kind of delusion that our minds construct through our senses, our karma, and conditioning. Buddhism believes that concentrations of energy give the appearance of solid matter, and that we each get very attached to our own experiences, our own beliefs, and mental constructs. It's these layers of interpretation and our ego that prevent us from seeing ultimate reality and bind us to delusion. That which we see around us has existence only insofar as we have given it a name. It's not that the world we perceive isn't unreal or a hallucination, it's just that it's a relative truth. This is why Buddhism places such a high value on the self awareness of the mind cultivated through meditation. The spiritual practice of meditation and mindfulness helps one to see through the veil of Maya and recognize the impermanent, constant changing nature of all things. I wanted to include one other religious stream in this discussion of Maya and the veil that is more connected to the Western Abrahamic religions, again, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So I'm going to talk about the mystical branch of Islam called Sufism. In Sufism, the veil is that which separates you, that gets between you and Allah, God. It's a term used to represent any habit, belief, thought, or misconception that clouds your perception of divine truth. Veils are roadblocks to intimacy with Allah. That's how it's understood in Sufism. Anything that keeps you from receiving the love of God. For the Sufi mystic, the spiritual journey is the process of removing those veils to achieve a direct, unmediated experience of God, a process known as kashf, or unveiling. That's the translation of it. In Sufism, the heart is a key spiritual locus. It is uncovered and opened through spiritual practice in order to allow divine truths to pour in. Deep understanding is believed to be rooted in the heart rather than the intellect. And further spiritual practice enables one to see by the means of the light of God. Well, we're going to switch our focus again, because another circumstance where veils are used is in funerary contexts. Death and funerals bring us face to face with the mysterious nature of existence. Anthropologists believe death is among the key motivators for humanity's creation of religion. Now, veils are often used to cover the face of mourners. On the right, we have two widely circulated photos. One, the one above, is Jackie Kennedy at John F. Kennedy's funeral after he'd been assassinated in 1963. And the other shows three queens of England united in grief at the funeral of from left to right, their father, their son, their husband, George VI of England, who died at a young age in 1952. So their veils help to provide more emotional privacy, but they also signal their loss and support their deep spiritual experience as they inhabit their own space and process what they're going personally through, much like religious initiates. The sculpture on the left is from a cemetery in Rome. The presence of the veil on the head signals that it's a mourner, a pleurant in French, or weeper in English. Sculptures like this installed at grave sites have been created in Western Europe since the 11th century. These beautiful marble mourners keep company with the soul of the deceased and assist the living in their mourning. They grieve the dead for eternity and also can help to inspire prayer for the benefit of the soul. This figure in a Viennese cemetery is popularly called the White Lady. The laurel wreath that crowns her head suggests that we're looking at a representation of the deceased rather than a mourner. That's because laurel, as an evergreen tree, symbolizes immortality. And in a funerary context, a crown of laurel symbolizes a life well lived and the triumph of a virtuous soul over death. The White Lady also holds a rose. In the world of the ancient Mediterranean, roses were associated with funerary rites and were placed at grave sites. Speaking of roses, I'll be offering a symbol Psyche and the sacred slide program through Zoom, much like this, but on the subject of the rose next February 15th, 2026. And it's graciously being hosted by the Theosophical Society in Seattle. So see you there. See you then. Did you notice the classical columns on both sides of the White Lady? They suggest ancient temples and sacred space. Perhaps the sacred space in this case is the world beyond death. A touching role that veils play in the context of death is the draping of corpses on display by using a shroud. When a loosely woven veil is draped over a human body, it takes on the figure's shape. So we have the resemblance of the figure, a suggestion of the person, but they're not as they were in life. In this role, the veil can represent the passage from one mode of existence to another. One of the most memorable examples of that is this magnificent life-sized marble sculpture representing the dead Christ, covered in a transparent shroud carved from the same block as the statue. It was carved in the mid-18th century by the Italian Giuseppe San Martino. And it shows the dead Christ laid on a bier. Along at his feet, you'll see the instruments of his passion and crucifixion, including the crown of thorns and nails. I have another slide of the same sculpture to show you. The thinness of the veil creates an immediacy that suggests that even in death, Christ is not that far away. It's a very touching representation of what Joseph Campbell meant when he said, death and rebirth are simply the passing back and forth of an individual through a curtain or a veil. Carrying that idea further, I'd like to mention spiritualism, the belief that spirits of the dead have the ability to communicate with the living and can act as guides. This was an idea especially popular during the 19th and early 20th century. Drawing on the new medium of photography, spirit photographers aimed to capture the images of ghosts and spirits that had passed on. They aimed to make the invisible visible. And the images were very meaningful to those involved. They would sit for a portrait, hoping that the image of their loved one's spirit, the deceased loved one's spirit, would appear in the photograph along with them when it was developed. And they accepted the concept that souls who have passed from this world but are on the other side of a thin veil that separates the physical from the non-physical. Whether spirit photography is the result of double exposures, an intent to fool, really it's ill irrelevant. Oh my gosh. What's pertinent to our exploration today is that the dead often appear veiled or swathed in cocoons of gauze-like material, as in this photo. Veiling was the imagery that spoke to people's sensibilities when it came to representing spirits and the other side. And it's very much like our current ideas about the manifestation of ghosts. They're semi-transparent, gauzy, not sharply seen, as if there's a veil between us and them. When we began this exploration, I asked what the veil represents within a spiritual context. Now, we've seen veils used to cover or close entrances to sacred spaces, sanctuaries, tabernacles. We've seen the veil appear within the symbolism of the tarot at the threshold that the high priestess guards. We've seen veils cover important deities and prophets that have crossed over or connected to the sacred. We've seen veils used in spiritual initiations and practice in order to move away from the world and draw closer to spirit and the divine. We've seen veils used to symbolize Maya and the misunderstanding that there's nothing more than the physical world that we can touch and see. And we've seen veils strongly associated with death. So, what do these examples have in common? The veil, again and again, spatially articulates the borders of that which is sacred. Ordinarily, the veil is not visible to most people, but those that are in relationship with the sacred, as initiates, dedicated practitioners, priests, priestesses, shamans, and many others, for example, channelers, practitioners of divination, those people have found pathways that help them to connect to the holy. I'd like to end by putting the story of the veil in an even bigger and more integrated context, and that's of reincarnation and the journey of the soul. Now, reincarnation is a very old idea. It can be traced through many cultures and religions, from indigenous cultures and Eastern religions, such as Buddhism and Hinduism, to the West, including ancient Greek philosophers and early Christians. The Theosophical Library here in Seattle has some wonderful books on the topic of reincarnation, and I encourage you to check them out. Now, some of you may have heard how near-death experiencers report dying, becoming disengaged from their body, feeling at peace and weightless, and finding themselves traveling through a long tunnel. And there's an inviting light at the end of the tunnel that beckons them on. At the tunnel's end, their experience is filled with light. It's a world full of light. Every person's experience on the other side is unique, but there are shared commonalities reported by near-death experiencers as they enter an expansive, beautiful world that radiates unconditional love. Some are given the choice to stay, but most are told their work is not finished on earth and that they must return to life. And it's a sad moment because heaven is a wonderful place to be. But the individual leaves the realm of light and returns to their earthly body knowing that one day they will return. These are spiritually transformative experiences that are deeply affecting. Never again is death something to be feared. Well, more and more reports of near death experiences are happening, thousands of them. And a significant reason for that is that medicine is finding improved ability to resuscitate people who have been pronounced clinically dead. This resuscitation is happening in ways that just weren't possible, that didn't exist in the past, such as cardiopulmonary resuscitation, CPR, which is pointed out by the Dutch cardiologist Pim van Lommel in his book, Consciousness Beyond Life, The Science of the Near-Death Experience. It's a wonderful book. The sheer number of living individuals, including doctors, who have been pronounced dead only to come back to life, has developed our knowledge of the other side. NDE, near-death experience testimonials, complemented by reports from attending doctors and nurses about what happened during the clinical death, have become the focus of academic study in respected universities and medical institutions the world over. Concurrent with that are an ever-increasing number of conferences, organizations like the International Association of Near-Death Studies, videos, and books. Some individuals report learning at length about the system of reincarnation during their near-death experience. So they've gone to the other side and they've learned and they've come back and uh, they explain that multiple incarnations and the wide variety of those incarnations provide us with the opportunity for soul learning and growth. So one life, ethnicities, gender identities, types of bodies, historical periods. The ultimate goal of learning is for opening the heart and drawing ever closer to the essence of love and the divine. Now, NDEers tell us that our souls plan their incarnations on Earth in advance in order to have certain experiences. You can kind of think of it as casting yourself as a character in a stage play. And these NDEers tell us that rounds of reincarnation are facilitated by the existence of a veil that exists between this and the other world where souls rest after death, where they integrate and plan between launching a new life. Passing through this veil, one is given the gift of amnesia, forgetting all that has been experienced before. It's the best way for souls to adapt to their new lives, for it would be really overwhelming and terribly confusing for people to remember all their lives at the same time. Using the stage analogy, the veil of forgetting assists one to stay in character during a performance. As Shakespeare says, all the world's a stage. I've gone into some detail about near-death experiences and reincarnation, not only to explain it to those unfamiliar with this territory, but also because there's so many connections to instances of the veil that we've reviewed today. The veil of forgetting between the other world and this world is parallel in function in a way to the veil of Maya. It separates the ordinary from awareness of the sacred realm. They're not exactly the same, for when the veil of Maya is dissolved, we still remember our earlier life, but they both play important roles in spiritual development. The veil of forgetting also resembles veils placed at entrances to tabernacles, temples, and sanctuaries, for it marks the borders of a sacred state of consciousness. closer to the divine than we are on earth. Of course, we've run into many connections with death during our look at the veil today. For example, how devout Jews use their prayer shawls as shrouds, or nuns taking the veil when they die to the secular world and enter a new monastic life dedicated to spirit and the love of the divine. And there's the Lenten veiling of the holy images in Catholicism, in which veils are removed on the day commemorating the death of Christ. And of course, the funerary sculpture incorporating veiled figures and 19th century spirit photography. There's a lot to reflect on, isn't there? I hope I haven't overwhelmed you. My aim was to show that the veil is very much integral to human culture around the world and throughout history. Perhaps it keeps reappearing because each and every one of us has experienced the veil as we've passed through the cycle of reincarnation again and again. I hope this has stimulated and enriched your experience of the veil. Perhaps you want to incorporate some ideas using the veil in your own spiritual practices. I'm going to leave you with a couple of quotes to meditatively ponder. They're by mystics who, no matter what their religion, are very aware of the veil. Mystics intuitively sense that there's a deeper mystery that lies behind life, and that mystery is full of life. So here's our first quote from Vivekananda. I'll just let you read it to yourself.
I think she's wrapping up. I'll go see what the books are. Yeah.
And I have one other quote from Rumi. Thank you for your presence today. It's been a special honor to share this world, this exploration with you.